Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Vermont Legislature's House Committee on Environment and Energy. This afternoon, we are taking up H-158, continuing our walkthrough with our Legislative Counsel, Michael O'Grady.
Good afternoon. This is Michael O'Grady with Legislative Counsel. I believe you are on the top of page 13. Still in the requirements for the collection plan. The subdivision 3 is that the plan needs to propose a protocol for documenting the amount of materials collected under the plan that are processed and marketed by SWMEs, including at materials recovery facilities, and shall propose a compensation formula, glass, plastic, and aluminum covered beverage containers that are made usable as recycled commodities. That compensation formula is to compensate the SWMEs for the lost revenue that they would have received if they were still processing glass, plastic, and aluminum.
Sorry, what subdivision are we on?
Page 14.
14. 13. No wonder I couldn't find it. I thought we were on 14. So, and actually, I just want to bring to the attention that we also have Matt Chapman with us from the agency, and he potentially can answer some of the questions we had yesterday on the PRO and the structure of it, and even maybe I might rewind us to the conversation about geographic distribution requirements and the 15 minutes, and if Matt, you could edify us on where that came from? Yeah, maybe even just a little background on the stakeholder group and your role in it would be helpful before we get going.
Sure. So for the record, Matt Chapman, Director of the Waste Management and Prevention Division with DEC. So to give folks background, there was a directive in Senate Natural Resources and Energy for the key stakeholders to basically address a lot of the problems that had been raised during testimony for the bottle bill last year. Senate Natural Resources and Energy. The chair asked that I facilitate sort of a working group that consisted of beverage manufacturers, retention centers, one of the two MRF operators, and other stakeholders. It was not everyone, right? To be clear, it was intended to be a smaller group to try and move quickly because we were close to the end of the session and wanting to get some recommendations back. But there was time for other interested persons to comment on the work that we were doing. And basically what you see in the draft that you've been working on is substantially what came out of that committee. I don't think there have been many changes or maybe a few, but it basically transformed the existing bottle bill system into a system that was administered by a producer responsibility organization using EPR concepts. And I think there's general agreement amongst the stakeholders that are out there. If you're designing a program to collect containers, you would not do it the way we did it in 1978, right? It's not it has ended up not having geographic distribution the way we would want to have geographic distribution. There's a lot of inefficiencies in the system. So we tried to look at most of the major comments from retention centers and from retailers and from the beverage manufacturers from the problems in the system. And as I think representative said, I mean, this bill goes through a lot of those problems and tries to present a solution to a structural issue with the bottle bill as it exists today. With respect to that issue, I think it does a lot and would advance the ball substantially forward. So I'm happy to focus in on any particular area that the committee has an interest in, but that's sort of structurally how we did it. We basically had a number of half-day meetings working through language, and then came back to the committee with a proposal that, there was broad agreement on many spots, but disagreement on some key areas as well. And I'm happy to highlight what I think the areas that were more controversial on.
That would be helpful. Representative Clifford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, we talked yesterday about what areas like building defines. Know what I mean? Instead of that area where they actually sort. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. That actually is like a really key area for retailers. So Vermont has a requirement that if you sell beverage containers, you need to redeem them. That's not the way we, for the most part, in the state redeem containers. Most retailers don't also regularly accept beverage containers back when they sell beverage containers. For other jurisdictions where that plays a more predominant role, we have more of a redemption center model as opposed to a retail redemption sort of model that some states use. Retailers find in-store redemption, when they don't do it very often, to be particularly burdensome to both, sort of collect the cans, get the redemption value, get them picked up. There are problems if there's not an existing sort of system in place with the retailer. So that 5,000 square feet is intended to take smaller retailers who don't normally do this and don't have the floor space to basically hold cans in one part of their store, and allow them to basically be exempt from the requirement that they accept cans back as a part of the bottom.
So, I mean,
Yes.
so what if that category, what if those smaller beverage centers still are in that or lower than that 5,000 square feet? You know what I mean? Still some stores that actually, like, I know the one where I lived is actually the store, and then the where they take the bottles back is in a separate building. So that was my concern.
So again, I think the provision that you're focused on doesn't relate to redemption centers. It relates to retailers, right? So it's intended to basically let the small country store that has very limited throughput, who doesn't normally redeem cans, to not be in the business of redeeming cans if there's a redemption center 2 blocks down the road.
Thank you.
So, and I may go to the sort of the top of questions we had yesterday that you may be able to help us with, separate from your role in addition to. We're contemplating a change to just going instead of basing it on what's in the can, but what the container's made of. Do you have thoughts on that?
So I don't to some degree, right? There's some complexity both in the bill and around the containers and the beverage, right? Like historically, there have been limited beverages, and that's been what's our focus as far as what gets collected. We were looking at the container definition and what's excluded from it. And I think, it may be worth the committee asking itself, like, if you're exempting, for example, pouches, does that mean that, is this a litter control issue, or is this a recycling issue? We can't recycle pouches. They are a litter problem. So what's the objective of why we're doing what we're doing? And I think there's also probably some definitional clarity around some of the container types that we can work on and help bring back to you. We had our own question around, is a box of wine, because it's in a pouch, considered a pouch for purposes of?
That is why we got to this idea that we just would do aluminum, PET plastic, and glass beverage containers.
Let me sort of pose it. We've got a little work group that I have a chat with, so let me see whether they have any comments with respect to that.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
And then just going to go through the ones that I have here. Do you have a sense of how many rogues there are today, as in, oh, you were able to listen a little yesterday.
I did, and the answer is none. Because basically what happens is when we find someone who is a rogue beverage manufacturer, we reach out to them, or we're notified, right, that they're selling in the state, not participating in the deposit system. We reach out to them and basically tell them that they have a choice. They can either play in the system or stop selling their beverage.
It's like good parenting.
I know, exactly. So we basically try and as soon as we become aware of them, there's a compliance effort to try and get them into compliance, or we issue a stop sale on their beverage side.
Okay, so we do have enforcement there. Any question?
Yeah, what does stop sale look like?
But we send a letter out to folks and basically
Folks,
retailers, distributors, so the people who basically sell through the beverages to, and say, this one, I don't know that we've ever had to do it with respect to the bottle bill. We have had to do it with other EPR programs. The bottle bill has been in existence long enough that people, I think, appreciate if they get told they need to be in compliance, they know what to do and they can comply with the bottle bill requirements.
yeah, I'm just interested in the mechanics of reaching out to all the general stores. So it's got to be the distributors, right?
We go through trade organizations and rely on constructive notice through the web, right, when we have to deal with things. So we try and get our information out as far as we can. Yes, we rely on distribution networks and
Kind of moving on. The 5,000 square feet, where is that number from?
So it was from the work group. There were conversations around the scope and scale of what size of store. I would be honest, there was a lot of conversation around it. I was not as attuned to those conversations as they could get. It's about what the right sort of scope of an exempt store should be.
Okay. And we had another question about labeling in consideration of the PET water bottles perhaps being in this bill. What happens currently if a label is lost?
According to the law, if the product is unlabeled, it's not eligible for redemption.
I checked other states and how they do it, those states with water, and it's no label, no refund.
Your labels. Okay. Yes.
But you can recycle those.
Labelless water bottles, yes. That's me. Going back through to do members have other questions up to where we are in the bill? So I was going to go back to kind of the beginning of the structure. We were wondering about making this 51% the beverage containers. So the PRO would be comprised. So basically you're saying one, but why not just say one?
I think you could say one.
Okay. We might try on just saying one.
That's fine.
Yes.
But it would still have to be approved by the agency to make sure that it isn't set up in a way that it's difficult for the smaller ones to be involved. So it's still to be approved.
Absolutely. And I think to underscore that, that's certainly one of the things that we're both cognizant of and want to monitor is that we're not setting up a system. There have been discussions where, and I'll just say small craft breweries have been basically barred from participating in commingling because of specific costs, because they're a small volume, but there's still a lot of sort of fees associated. We would have, I think, a larger oversight role in how small manufacturers participate in a PRO.
So, okay. That's sort of an interesting, so my next highlighted paragraph is the producer responsibility organization does not create any unreasonable barriers to joining, and assuming the agency is the arbiter of unreasonable.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you have other places where you enforce something that's determined to be reasonable or unreasonable? Michael's thinking of one now. What are you thinking of?
There are other PROs, EPR programs that have that similar.
Oh, okay. Like which ones?
Batteries, I think.
Do batteries have small manufacturers?
They have, yes, like
Which batteries?
model airplane battery manufacturer.
Why would we say unreasonable barriers? Because we want everybody in. So why wouldn't we say shall not establish barriers?
Hmm. Any
There's
barrier.
going to be criteria for you're going to have to meet all the registration requirements. So that's kind of a barrier. You're going to have to pay a fee to be part of the PRO. Kind of a barrier.
Except the fee would be based on size and everybody would be subject to the same thing. I guess the point is you can't figure out a way to.
It might be unreasonable if it wasn't based on size or volume, and a small guy had to pay the same as a big one.
You're comfortable with under.
I am comfortable with that principle.
Do you have a suggestion for geographic distribution and sort of how we would meet?
Okay.
So convenient opportunities is on page 12. I highlighted that. And then on 13, we had a very long conversation twice, 15 minutes. So we'd rather not reprise that, but perhaps we could, are there other ways to get to geographic distribution requirement other than what we've already said, which is convenience of location, convenient opportunities, 3 points in a county, 1 point for a town of 7,000 or more.
So I think it might be good just listening to your conversation yesterday to define some terms as they're sort of used in this bill, even though they're not defined terms. One is redemption center, and I think that that's what a lot.
Can I just ask you for one question? Do you mean we should put?
Well, I don't know.
Here, you're just
maybe. I mean, there are terms that I think that everyone who's working with this program understands, but they're not defined in the bill. And I leave it to the committee as to whether it makes sense to define them. But in your conversation yesterday, I think it makes sense, at least for me, to define them for the committee, which is redemption center. Like that's, I think, what most of you are thinking about. It's the retail location where you bring your containers in and someone sorts them into bags and gives you money for the nickels on the containers. There's a, what is the term we use? Point of redemption where where the consumer receives the deposit. So that includes those redemption centers, but it can also be things like reverse vending machines. You've seen those machines where you feed the containers in it and it spits back the redemption value to you. And then lastly, you'll see the bill reference just straight up points of redemption. And that is technology neutral, right? There's lots of innovative new ways that companies are coming out with redeeming bottles, like backdrops, where you basically have a identifier tag you attach to the bag, you put it into a drop. It's got identifier information to an account that you have on a web service, and they deposit the money back, and you don't have to stand and wait for your materials to be counted. So there's lots of different sort of methods, and to some degree, this is intended to increase the types of opportunities for people to do redemption of these containers without being technology specific, while also acknowledging there is some litter abatement and value to having direct sort of deposit return to people when they go along the side of the road and pick up containers and want their money back immediately.
So I think though that did you think you were defining 3 terms? Because I only heard 2. I heard redemption center and point of redemption.
And then it's point of redemption with immediate deposit, I think is what it's defined or used in the bill. And that's intended to include redemption centers, but also things like reverse vending machines and basically where you immediately receive a deposit back, but not necessarily from a human.
Okay.
And so when you get to convenience, I think it's fine getting rid of the 15-minute requirement. That was something that we had talked about internally. I think there's lots of ways they could have satisfied that 15-minute requirement. But having said that, I think you could delete it in its entirely, or you could just frankly require us to ensure that the collection has adequate geographic distribution to ensure that convenient collection is occurring, something that is more narrative in its scope than sort of direct. And I think we can do that too.
Can you tell me how in places that are very sparsely populated, you would have thought they might, like the creative solutions to the 15-minute requirement?
I think that to a large degree, we would probably be asking the PRO to look. I'll just use Representative Pat's example. You know, like the small market that exists in Wolcott or the transfer station to have a bag drop there, right? So that it's not a direct return, but you have an ability when you go to the market to throw your bag in, or alternatively, when you go to the transfer station, you can do a can drop as well, right? So it's not always going to be a system where it wasn't intended that you would always immediately get your money back, but there would be opportunities throughout the state where you would increase the opportunity for convenience.
Great, that's helpful. Representative Logan.
Thanks. Yeah, I moved here from Oregon, where there's a redemption program and very large rural sections of the state. And there were reverse vending machines at the grocery store. So like for small town, markets, you could imagine the PRO ensuring that there's a reverse vending machine installed at the town market, for example.
Who installs those now in Vermont?
It's a mix, so Tomra sells them. Retailers buy them, or they rent them from Tomra or other people.
And if a retailer buys it, what's the incentive?
So the retailer, and again, you know what? I am vaguely aware of what the financial incentives are between sort of when you get a reverse vending machine, or somehow some of the handling fees get split between Tomra and the retailer. But if you want more detailed information, you should probably have a representative from Tomra.
Fair enough. Representative Bonner.
Rather than get into all this, we could just do the language you suggested in C, just giving you a little latitude to make sure the distribution is reasonable, geographically reasonable. And that's all we have to do, I think.
Yep.
That'll make it simple.
Representative Tory.
Just on that, would there be any stakeholder engagement as you make that decision?
So I think as we move through the bill, there's a requirement that the PRO engage stakeholders in its plan development.
And that's a great segue.
Back to page 14.
Excellent.
So do you want me to go over subdivision 3 again on page 14, lines 1 through 6?
Sure.
So the plan must propose a protocol for documenting the amount of materials collected under the plan that are processed and marketed by the SWMEs, including materials recovery facilities, and shall propose a compensation formula for glass, plastic, and aluminum beverage containers that are made usable as recycled commodities. So again, since the PRO is going to be collecting those containers and gathering the revenue from them in the recyclable market, the SWMEs will no longer, and so they will lose revenue. And this is to address that through a compensation formula for that lost revenue.
Right. So Matt, the conversation went yesterday, you probably heard it, but maybe, I mean, like, does that go on forever? Who decides the value of that material? What is envisioned in that scenario?
So part of this, and this, again, my understanding is this is what happens in California, is that there are audits of MRF materials for beverage containers collected by the MRF, right? And then there is an agreement between the PRO and the MRF that they get compensated for that collection and recycling of that material.
Those are, you mean beverage containers with nickel deposit on them?
No,
We don't do a nickel.
right.
But in our case, it would be, is that what you're imagining? That it would be?
It would be an agreement between the PRO and the MRFs for the value of the material that's been collected, both, so if you think about it, each one of those containers had a handling fee associated with it. And there's other value. They basically are compensating the MRFs. This also has the benefit of alleviating some of the pressure of material loss from the expansion of the bottle bill as well.
I guess I thought that's what this was intended to do. Not that it was going forward just collecting nickels, because they could collect their own, the ones that end up in the blue bins, but this was going backwards to the material they lose when we add the bottles, the water bottles in particular, to the bottle bill.
So again, I think that the policy, again, that was discussed amongst the stakeholder group is, there's value in the material being collected and recycled. And if the material is collected and recycled through the traditional redemption system, that's fine, but it's also being collected and recycled through the MRF system. And the PRO is basically obligated as a part of this to pay the MRFs for their role in the collection and recycling process.
I feel like I'm not understanding what this is really supposed to do.
I think you're there. It's the lost revenue from the swimmies, and it's swimmies or MRFs or swimmies that the MRF isn't selling on the recyclable market anymore.
Right, but it's looking back. It's like the stuff they're losing because we've added.
It's stuff they're losing because of the collection by the PRO.
But when does that end? Do we pay them forever, or does the PRO have to pay them forever? Like how does
now it's every plan is 5 years. If you wanted to change that, you could change that now and say that this is only time limited, or you could change it 5 years from now.
just because how would you measure that? Because the market's volatile and I don't get it.
I was listening to this. I'm wondering whether I'm hearing two different things.
You are hearing two different things. That's what I'm trying to
So,
figure out which one it is.
I'm thinking that, I think it's what Mr. Chapman just said, that if I heard him right, the plan shall propose a protocol for documenting the amount of materials collected under the plan. So this is just the various materials that are collected under this bill that are processed and marketed by solid waste entities. So I'm guessing, so that's the materials that go through the MRF currently, not materials that they're not getting,
Okay.
but materials that they actually are getting is the way I'm reading this. And that this language proposes that they get compensated for those materials that they process by the manufacturers.
Covered beverage containers that are made usable.
That's right.
So it's just the ones, the deposit ones that end up in the blue bin.
Right.
Oh, well, that to me, couldn't they collect their own nickels? Oh, but you're saying the handling fee.
Right. So, and I think it's important to note that once the material is in the blue bin, those nickels basically escheat to the state. There's no one separating the cans out from the blue bins. And so what this is intended to do is to recognize the system value and frankly, the the recycling value associated with the MRF collection of covered beverages, right? So if I take my Coke can, and instead of taking my Coke can and taking it and redeeming it, I throw it in my blue bin. The MRF then processes that can and turns it into like recycled aluminum. And there's value to the PRO in doing that, and they pay the MRF for the work of recycling that can.
Representative Bongard.
Why is the value to
Yeah,
the
why
PRO?
is this?
What I see is, maybe I feel like I'm being thick about this, but if we're gonna have two systems. We've got the swimmies taking all the recyclables they take in, then we have this system taking in the things it takes in. I don't even understand at the most fundamental level why that's there at all.
I don't either. That's what I'm stuck on.
Because it doesn't, I get the part about the loss initially, but on the other hand, as we discussed yesterday, they at least in part make it up by not having to deal with glass. So I'm going, okay, so a few cans get thrown in, they're getting all kinds of other aluminum and recyclables anyway. What's the difference? If they're, and I don't get it.
Look at it either. Representative Sebelia.
Yeah, I would just remind us that they still have to deal with glass. We're not taking all the glass out.
Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the proposed compensation formula, has there been a formula written and who administers that?
So there is not in the state of Vermont. So my recollection from the stakeholder process that we went through last year is that this is a concept that was borrowed from the state of California and how the CRV value works in the state of California for ensuring material gets recycled. And it was something the manufacturers were, the beverage distributors and brands were open to doing to ensure a viable, prosperous recycling market.
Yeah.
So if I may, that being said, again, who is going to make up that formula? Is it going to be just a copy of what California does, and then you administer and you go around to all these different places and say, this is what you have to comply?
So ideally, I mean, really what you're talking about is three entities. It's the Rutland MRF, the Chittenden MRF, and the PRO need to reach an agreement on what the compensation formula is for this particular provision of the law. And we would obviously be involved in that, but I think it's those three parties kind of taking a look at what the collection of those, I mean, normally I think the way it works in California, my understanding is that they basically go to the bales of material at the MRF and do an audit on how many of the materials that are in those bales of PET, aluminum, glass isn't baled, but the material that's collected, how much of it is bottle bill material and how much of it is non-bottle bill material. And there's a compensation structure based on the amount of bottle bill material being collected.
So we're still in those early stages. Nobody's really checked out any of these MRFs as far as, okay, you're gonna have the staffing to do that? Is that a big thing or?
So as far as the audit function, I mean, that's something we do every 5 years. Is we audit out. We do a waste composition study.
So kind of a higher level question. How does expanding the bottle bill affect our existing recycling system? Does it not affect it? Or what would your expectation be? That it will not affect it, that it will strengthen it, or that it will put stress on it?
So,
and why?
We did a study in 2014, sort of impacts the expanded bottle bill on the recycling system. Basically said that there would be impacts on the recycling system with an expanded bottle bill. And it would cost more. The honest response to your question is that study's 10 years old and the data is probably out of date. And new data would be useful in giving a good response to the question you just asked.
That's another question. On the recycling system that we have, not bottle bill system. What would you say are the biggest weaknesses of that system right now?
The recycling not bottle bill system.
Yeah.
I think the biggest weakness of the system is probably foreign material, non-recyclable material getting into the system and causing some degree of contamination in the system.
Okay.
Barry and then Seth.
So it sounds like this proposes that the recyclers, the MRFs, get compensated for glass, plastic, and aluminum. And we know right now, for instance, that plastic and aluminum are moneymakers for them. So they don't need to be compensated for those items. They tell us that it costs them money to get rid of glass. So it does seem on the face of it that it would make sense to say, we're putting this stuff out to the world. Not everybody's giving it back to us. They're giving it to you instead. So we're gonna, instead of paying the redemption centers money to handle it, we're gonna basically give money to them to handle it instead. I do wonder though if that sets up a situation where we're sort of removing an incentive from the MRFs to find good uses for this material, that if they're just going to be compensated for it by some formula, then they don't have that much of an incentive to really work to get rid of it in the most valuable way. Or maybe they still do because they make more money. I guess I'm sort of thinking as I'm talking, but I don't know. My other thought about all this is just that it seems like with commodities being so volatile, that this would be really hard to put in place that would make sense from month to month, let alone year to year. And it just seems just complicated and hard to do, and just I'm not sure that it's really worth the trouble when we've heard that the cost to the MRFs for taking this material and getting rid of it, like their increased costs are going to be very low under the bottle bill. So why should we go into sort of contortions of trying to figure out how to compensate them when they can pass along these very modest costs to consumers? We heard $1.50 per household per year. So that seems like a pretty minimal ask, so that we don't have to go through this process of trying to figure this out, which sounds fraught at best.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Sarah?
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe that section should be more about having circling back with the MRFs to find out how has it impacted your operations, to just see if it's an issue or not. Then explore compensation if something were to come over.
Sibilia and Logan.
Have we ever looked at consolidating these two recycling systems? And if there is a way to improve the function and quality of the recycled materials by bringing these two systems together?
So yes, we've looked at the consolidation of the two systems.
Where could I see that?
That's in the 2014 report as well. I mean, I think it is probably, I had a lot of agreement with the testimony that was given yesterday around the bottle bill. I think the one thing I would probably disagree with is where the material is going and the values associated with recycling. most of Vermont, based on what I have been told by the districts and others, most of the material from aluminum is going to can recycling. PET has a lot of different uses that are all recycled uses. And I guess then you're going to have to ask yourself the question about whether bottle to bottle is the best recycling, or whether turning it into fleece jackets or rugs or other consumer products is acceptable recycling, right? Like, so I think people throw around the concept of downcycling pretty.
I don't know what that means.
Downcycling, well, I think it depends on who is talking, right? There's no formal definition of it. But so I think I would just say, with the exception of glass, I think glass is really debatable. Some of our glass goes to container recycling. Some of it is used in what I would agree is non-recycling functions, sort of like as a sand base, or it has limited uses. So glass is the most challenging material to recycle. Our PET and aluminum are being turned into consumer products that are used throughout the United States. So same with fiber for the most part. So,
but it is true that the people making beverage containers, again, seek out beverage bottle bill state material because they can readily reuse it to keep it going in the system.
absolutely. And I think
That's the difference. It's a dead end use versus a continued use. The simple difference. You don't agree?
I think that there's recycling opportunities for a lot of different materials. And I guess I always get hesitant in putting value judgments on a recycled end product, right? If we've taken a discarded product and turned it into another consumer product and extended the life of that material, I don't know whether I would do the transformation of a bottle into another bottle that's immediately used and discarded is a better use than turning it into a rug that is used for 10 years in a building, right? So I guess my larger point is that I don't know whether we should be putting value labels on a recycled product.
Except that we keep creating more and more and more of these bottles. So at some point, we need to make sure that we are, not continuing the extraction of fossil fuels and the creation of all of the externalities that are not accounted for when you keep making new materials for this single use. And so I think I would differ with you on that, but I hear you. We could just differ. Representative Sibilia.
To that point, I'm wondering what in this bill is actually, because I agree with you, Madam Chair, we would like to make less of those and extract less, do less damage. But what in this bill is slowing that down or stopping that? I mean, I think we're just, so theoretically, I mean, I guess that's the debate that you all are having, whether or not it's ending up in less.
Well, at least reusing them is better than kind of dead ending them off the cliff every time, in my estimation.
I had another question.
Okay.
Which is, of course, leaving my head. Sorry, to come back to it.
It's okay, Representative Bongar.
Just going back to this a second ago on the impacts to municipal recycling. Representative Sakowitz made me get the point here. That's the first time I understood when you said the idea is that we're putting this material in. It's not all coming back to us. You're getting stuck with some of it. You swimmies getting stuck with it. So then how do we compensate for you for that? That I think is what's going on with that paragraph. Having said that, I also agree with, I think, Representative Sakowitz's analysis. It would lead me to think we know that we've got goals of getting 70, 75%, 80% of this stuff back in. The districts get paid for what the aluminum and the bottles that come in are actually of value to them, the plastic bottles. maybe they're less. I guess my thinking is, I am in favor, I think, of just getting rid of this paragraph. Because I don't know why we would, for the little tiny bit that we would be paying or they're taking on, it just seems like kind of crazy. Just keep we've got these two systems side by side. Whatever you get, you take care of it. And we try to get as much we can over here and we take care of it. I really don't get fundamentally don't get the connection. I do get the point. That's what it is, that it's to compensate them for taking the parts that don't come into us, but they get paid for the aluminum, they get paid for the PET. And we're trying to save them all the glass. So why are we paying them for what? It doesn't make sense to me. But I'm interested if you have what's your best response to that?
So this section was added in as an acknowledgement that there is going to be an impact to MRFs by taking this material out of the system, and that this was a way to provide some approach to stabilize those costs over time, so that it didn't result in significant rate increases at the tipping floor. So that, I think, is the purpose for why this was added in, and that's the primary reason why it was added.
Representative Logan.
Thanks. So one suggestion for how to amend this would be to have the PRO talk with the solid waste management entities and make that part of the plans that they're helping to create. Particularly because when Casella was in here providing testimony and I asked directly, is this profitable for you? They said, well, this is a private business. We don't have to give you that information. They would share it with the PRO, however, because that's protected trade secrets or whatever. So information that we are unable to, I don't have an opinion. I don't have the information I need to determine whether or not this will negatively impact the Casella family enterprise. And I think, so it does seem like the PRO could engage with solid waste swimmies in order to assess the impact on them and determine if some form of compensation to them is necessary, or we could just delete it, which I'd be fine with following Representative Sakowicz. But also, I think one of the things that they're misrepresenting in talking about, what the end use of the material that they sell to recycling facilities is that a large proportion of that material that they sell often ends up in a landfill. So single stream recycling, because it's contaminated. So this redemption program, the idea is to produce a higher quality set of recyclable, non-contaminated materials, as I understand it.
Right. So Representative Logan said that within the PRO, they would have to disclose. I'm not sure that's true in this particular situation. It was in the household hazardous waste version that we just passed.
Yeah.
That's what.
Oh, right. I'm getting all the PROs confused.
That's totally understandable,
Yeah.
but it's not in here. We may want to think about it. I think we should move on. I guess we could take a poll. Do folks want to amend this? Keep it the way it is, amend it, or delete it? Does anyone have a feeling in any of those directions?
My feeling
Yes.
would be deleted.
Delete it. Others? Okay.
I'll take the flip side of that just for purposes of conversation and don't let them extend.
We don't actually need conversation
We
now.
don't need conversation.
We don't need any more. Thanks. Go ahead, Christy.
And I didn't get a donut this morning.
Oh.
That's just like- Listening to Representative Logan, and I appreciate the fact that she might have been confused with the hazardous household waste, but I still going to advocate for, I do not know why the PROs couldn't consider municipal swimmies or the private swimmies in this collection plan to understand the impacts or how they could participate.
So you're making a case for making an amendment. Others?
Maybe I'm getting used to, but I understand that some swimmies have a redemption-like function. In them. Add stuff to them.
Swimmies do that, but
I feel like I heard that from.
Laura's transfer station.
Transfer station.
That's what municipal recycling is here with that.
All right, I think we should keep going and we'll revisit this. We'll come back.
Page 14,
Oh my God.
line 7, subdivision 4. The plan has to include education efforts that will be undertaken to increase the number of beverage containers redeemed in the state. Moving on from there,
It's clear.
line 10, subdivision 5. The PRO shall consult with stakeholders on the development of the plan. Plan shall include processes for regular consultation, shall not be less than annual. Stakeholders, including the agency, redemption centers, municipal and private recycling organizations, and other stakeholders.
It's already in
So
there.
we don't need the other one.
Yeah.
We could strike.
Yes.
There you go.
Delete
Always
three.
wants to keep going and put in context.
Okay. You're now leaving the plan and going on to the reporting requirement. Page 14, line 15. At a frequency required by the secretary, but not less than annually, the PRO reports the following information to ANR. Contact information for each redemption center participating in the approved stewardship plan. The amount in containers and tons and material type of beverage containers redeemed under the plan. The location and amount of beverage container material that was recycled and what products the beverage container material was recycled into. The carbon impacts associated with administration of the plan. Cost.
Question about number 3, the location and amount, the location of the material that was recycled? Like where
Right,
it's,
it's like-
where it's being recycled,
Where it's being recycled,
where it's
what
going.
it's being recycled to.
Thank you.
So page 15, line 5. They also need to report the costs associated with administration of the plan, including costs of collection, management, and transportation of redeemed containers and the amount received for commodities. Moving on, a description of any improvement made in the reporting year to increase ease and convenience for consumers to return beverage containers for redemption. Efforts taken by or on behalf of the distributor to reduce environmental impacts through the product life cycle and to increase reusability or recyclability at the end of the life cycle by material type. Efforts taken by or on behalf of the PRO to improve the environmental outcomes of the program by improving operational efficiency, such as reduction of truck trips, improved material handling or compaction, or the increased use of refillable containers.
Can I ask, I gotta go back to the previous. Efforts taken by or on behalf of the distributor. So then, I mean, because it seems like reducing the impacts throughout the product life cycle is in large part the manufacturer.
And it probably should be manufacturer.
Except, go ahead.
We talked about your idea of the deliveries also being pickups. That's a distributor.
Yeah.
Action.
Why wouldn't we say both then?
Yep.
Representative Clifford.
Madam Chair, so, yeah, maybe you can help me with this one. Number 4, line 3, number 4, the carbon impacts. They're supposed to let us know the carbon impacts associated with the administration of the stewardship plan. What if they don't know how to figure that out? Was that something that the agency would help them with?
So there are a number of recognized at this point tools out there that you can use to model what the carbon impact is. So I would expect that they would be able either to do it themselves or hire a consultant.
Okay, thank you.
And the 2014, and correct me if I'm wrong, that systems analysis included a carbon impact in 2014.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that.
Page 15, line 19, a description and copies of the educational materials and strategies the producer uses for purposes of the program. And then last, any additional information required by the secretary. And there's just a subdivision on submission of the plan to the secretary, submitted to the secretary. And after concluding that the elements of the plan will maximize diversion of recyclable materials, provide convenience to users, and create a more circular economy, the secretary's approval shall be for a period not greater than 5 years. Okay. Then you get to the fiscal audit program and fiscal audit in the CPR program. First, there's the program audit. Every 5 years, the PRO conducts an independent third-party audit of the operation of the plan, not just the cost, the operation, and shall make recommendations to improve the operation of the collection program established by the chapter. And there's the fiscal audit, which is annual. The PRO shall conduct an independent third-party fiscal audit, and it shall provide a transparent fiscal analysis of the PRO organization, its expenditures, the number of beverages collected, the amount of unclaimed deposits. Audit shall also provide the redemption rate of beverage containers redeemed in the state after approval by the secretary.
Representative Morris.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. We heard some testimony, and this is not necessarily a new concept, but new to this bill, to add a trigger to increase the fee from 5 cents to something else. Is this where that would go, or do we want to have that conversation now or later?
So I think that you have options, but just from last year when the trigger was in the bill, it was in 1534, the next section, where if the performance goal wasn't met in any durational period that you decide on, then it would go up, the deposit would go up. But you could have put it elsewhere as well. You could put it under the section that sets the deposit and say, yesterday, I think you had the discussion, should it just be an ongoing piece of language that whenever the agency or whenever the PRO fails to meet its redemption rate over the life of the plan, the deposit shall increase by X. You could put that under the deposit section. So you have options if you want to have that kind of a trigger.
I think it should go under the deposit section.
So that would be 1521. And that is on, actually 1522. That is on page 5. And you could put it somewhere in that section. You can see page 5, line 5, that's where the 5 cents is set for most containers. You're now going to have a 15-cent deposit for wine bottles along with the existing 15-cent. You could, for example, page 5, line 19, that old repealed subsection, could put in, that's something that says when the PRO fails to meet a redemption rate set wherever you're going to set the redemption rate over the life of the plan, the secretary, you might want to say the secretary is authorized to increase the required deposit by 5 cents.
Or required?
You could do required.
I mean, is authorized just like let it be at their discretion?
Well, the thing that I'm kind of debating in my mind is Ways and Means and how they prefer to have the authority to say whether or not a fee like this goes up or down. But the response to that is this isn't a fee.
It's not a fee, yeah.
This is a deposit that consumers pay, and it is circular, and it is not something that pays for the cost of any state service. So I think you have options. You could work on language if you wanted to do that.
Representative
I
Baumgartz.
think if it's left up to the secretary, it becomes critical. And if we want to just say if it's not met, the rule isn't met for a consecutive 2-year period. It's not by necessity, that's what we're talking about. So I'd be inclined to just do that.
That was a testimony yesterday. Others, does anyone?
I just have a question. So it doesn't, by going up, it just makes the incentive to the consumer more. And
Brings more back.
brings more back. It doesn't really impact anybody else, except maybe the manufacturers could say, like the small wine, that it's going to somehow disincentivize purchases in the first place. I'm just wondering, is there PRO conflict of interest with that?
No, it motivates them to keep it low. For that reason, I guess, yeah, if that's a reason, yeah.
But in our case, our goal is to see redemption rates go up. So
That's what I mean.
That would-
Motivates them to
right.
keep the redemption rates. Although I'm not sure of the role of the PRO in getting redemption rates up. It seems like it's more just like if consumers lose interest and aren't doing it, it's going to motivate the consumer to participate. Unless it's not convenient, but otherwise, what's their role in it? Representative Logan.
Well, yeah, it is convenience, but also education.
Yeah,
You know,
sort of already trained.
I mean, you may feel that way. I don't know. But as the cost goes up too, then more motivation for the consumer to redeem it. But I know that in my housing community, a lot of people put stuff in the recycling without even realizing that they're paying a deposit on things because they move here from somewhere else.
Maybe, yeah.
Just real quick, just remind people that this 5 cents was set in 1970.
Yeah, that's the value. of
And
that.
from what we've heard, that in today's dollars is anywhere from 25 to 30 cents.
35.
So if people could, put out what amounts to a quarter back then, making a 5 cent increase at this point seems more than reasonable. It seems. So just want to reframe us and give that perspective.
Yeah, I'm just realizing there is an expense because they have to relay. Right? But that so it would go into effect,
That's
but it doesn't cost more to relabel. It just means that it has to. Does it? Because I mean, I don't know what the product was.
Yep. That's all these manufacturers redesigning labels. It's not free.
There's a cost though. So we should start with a higher number.
I was going to say the same thing. I think everybody had.
We started with 10 cents last year.
That's
Thoughts on deposits? Representative Sibilia.
Madam Chair, I'd like all of the issues to come back in. So even if we're increasing this, to come back into the system, so just.
But to
make
be
that point.
clear, you mean come back into the solid waste management fund or solid waste fund?
Solid waste. management account in the waste management assistance fund.
No wonder I didn't quite get it right. Yeah,
Because the system doesn't have enough money.
so, and where is the language that directs these sheets to the Clean Water Fund?
In 10 VSA 1389. It's not in this bill.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just try and get on the deposit side. What are folks leaning towards? Thoughts? Keep the depositing nickel, raise it to a dime now, or have a standard that needs to be met, and if it isn't met over a 2-year period, have it go up. On guards, then Celia.
I would say leave it at 5, the trigger.
Okay,
I'm fine with raising it even more than 10 cents, but I want the systems to come together. So there's that.
Representative Logan,
I'd say raise it and then have there be a trigger to raise it more.
raise it to 10 cents now.
I would third them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Raising it to 10 cents now and writing in a trigger. And I'm looking, Michael, for your guidance, Matt, where you think it makes the most sense to put in the trigger language.
Yeah, from the drafter's point of view, I would put the deposit in the same section. So if you're going to be increasing the deposit, I put it in 1522. So all deposit information would be there.
That's what I was.
You could put the goal somewhere else. Failure to meet the recycling goal over a 2-year consecutive period. But the goal would be somewhere else.
Okay, in the plan or in the report, where's that, the goal?
Right now, it's under a separate section. It's 1534.
Well, it's already there, we'll leave it there. And sure, Celia and then Logan. Are you on same topic?
1533, the
Page 16?
yeah, page 16,
We've got it.
program and fiscal audit, which is every 5 years. My question is starting when? Is that starting at the effective date?
The fiscal audit is every year. Program audits every 5 years.
So starting when?
And so the program audit, that is something that becomes effective at the same time as the program. So it's all in section 1. So it takes effect. And take effect July 1, 2023.
Does it say that in the?
Is it on the?
I was working the effective dates yesterday and I'm back in trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I think you need a new effective date subdivision for that.
Well,
So it's gonna be about. You probably can do the fiscal audit as soon as the product PRO starts to register. March 1, 2025, but the program, I think you can make them both effective March 1, 2025.
We have to add those.
page 20, we haven't gone to it yet. Let's keep going. The Clean Water Fund is in here, it turns out.
Well, the Clean Water Fund is in here. No, it's for after the 50% is used by the PRO, then you have to reduce what goes into the clean water fund by 50%, and then the other 50% goes to the solid waste management account. So if you just want to get rid of it, you're gonna have to do a separate amendment. You're gonna have to change what's in here if you're just gonna strike what goes into the clean water fund.
Let's get there.
Okay. All right, page 16, line 18, this is the goal. The goal of the state that the following minimum beverage container redemption rate shall be satisfied. And it's not every 2 years, it's so I don't know if that affects.
The way that I was thinking about it is, whatever year you're in, if the goal is 75%, if you missed that for 2 years in a row, and even if it was on the year of change, if you had missed the 75% in its last year, then you missed the 80% in its first year, you're out of compliance and it goes up a nickel. So any 2 years in a consecutive year.
So it's in any 2 years where the PRO fails to meet the relevant collection goal for that year.
For those years.
Consecutive years.
2050, this thing goes out.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, 2026, and 4 years later, 2030, 5 years later, 2035, and then 15 years later. That's interesting. Anyone know where that language came from? You do. Where?
It came from the stakeholder group. And it is not easy to reach 90%.
No.
It's not even clear, but that was the recommendation. They thought if given a long enough period of time to influence consumer behavior, that they were willing. There was a little bit of friction around that. But
So do we know what the highest state redemption rate is? I feel like we just saw it on a slide.
We did
90,
see.
91.
Yeah, it was 90 or 91. In Europe. That was in Europe. Right. Yeah.
I think that was in the United States.
or
There might have
Oregon.
been slightly higher rates in Germany.
Yeah. Pretty high though. This is achievable, in other words, especially by 2050.
Just hold that. We're walking through. That's
Yeah.
good.
So in these goals, and when we're measuring, is there a factor that we use to account for fraud?
Fraud?
Yeah.
And fraud, do you mean people from New Hampshire?
Yes. Is there a factor that's used in that determination?
Not explicitly in the bill.
You might bump up our rates if they get through the system.
There is a provision in the bill, in the chapter that's not in the bill, so it wasn't changing, that gives A&R enforcement authority for fraud. But it's not explicitly built into the performance goals.
So what is the effect of that? Does that, or maybe there's no effect, but does that incentivize fraud?
I mean, fraud's already incentive between New Hampshire and there was the municipality that was doing it, New Hampshire.
And always remembering, when we talk about the fraud, it's self-inflicted. They don't have to put the Vermont deposit on beverages they sell in other states. So just remember that when you're talking about the fraud piece.
Okay.
Moving on. Page 17, line 5, there is a report every 5 years from A&R to you, General Assembly, with the current beverage container redemption rate and a recommendation whether the container deposit should be increased. With your automatic increase. I don't think you need lines 10 and 11, but you might want a recommendation from them on efficacy of the program. I don't know, something related.
Yeah, along those lines. We are no longer House Committee on Natural Resources, so Fish and Wildlife on line 7.
It says House Committees on.
Oh, I'm looking at it.
So
Sorry. Good.
Would the audit reports be good information to be reporting back to us? And audits are those reported back to the secretary as well?
there's no explicit requirement that the audits be submitted to you or the secretary, but I think it definitely should go to the secretary. I think it's a policy decision if you want it.
But I think your other question, I mean, so are we going to does the audit include the same information?
The audit, the efficacy, the program audit should include the redemption rate.
Yep. We don't need to. Yes.
Sorry, this is going to be a super fundamental question that I guess I missed somewhere along the way. Just how do we true up the deposits? Does it matter between the states that are on the can?
Between what?
The states that are on the can. So, like, if you're sold, so if I shop in Greenfield, Massachusetts, pay the deposit in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and then I bring my recyclables up with me to my daughter in Williston, which is totally feasible if I didn't bring them to the landfill. Like, what is happening with that nickel?
It may not be a nickel, be a dime,
You get to Massachusetts, you'll get a dime.
and
Lose.
that's part of. There isn't anything that offsets that.
Wouldn't be worth driving back to Greenfield.
There was an entire Seinfeld episode.
Sorry, no, I'm just trying to understand going back to the percentage.
Percentages to be artificially inflated out of state containers.
Is there sometimes we do hear that an enforcement action is taken about cross-border fraud in New Hampshire who has no bottle bill, but has it ever come up where, other than Seinfeld, where this was an issue?
I am unaware of anyone. I mean, we have cross-border challenges with New Hampshire. There are containers that are on New Hampshire redeemed in Vermont, but I am unaware of there being a significant issue with respect to, purchases in Massachusetts being a challenge or New York being a challenge in Vermont.
You don't like that answer?
No, I really need to. I would like to. I'm happy to study offline, Madam Chair, if necessary, but really want to understand how the nickel moves.
How the nickel moves.
Covered that yesterday.
Between states.
It doesn't move between states.
Don't.
The only thing that moves.
But you're going to redeem my Massachusetts can in Williston. You're going to give me back a nickel for a can I purchased
You'll be
in
losing money on that.
Massachusetts.
Consumers made whole.
right?
I'm
You're gonna-
losing, so I'm losing money on that.
We would be losing.
I would be losing money on that
If you
because
buy it.
Mass is a 10 cent.
That's why we're trimming up with
Right,
Massachusetts
and-
now.
Are we doing that with Massachusetts?
We just agreed to.
Yeah, okay, great, all right. Okay,
We should add that.
and New York,
True up with Massachusetts.
and New York,
All of us, we're gonna go-
I think part of the answer though is that in general, where you, the state in which you buy a container is the state in which you should return that container for your deposit back.
of course.
So-
Financial.
Well, and
That's-
honestly,
that's-
but actually,
No, you-
I'm sorry, but the UPC and the whole tracking thing eventually, as part of this, will presumably get to that. Do I have that right? That's got to.
I think that will depend on implementation of the technology for redemption.
Yeah, because right now I think there's only one state, or there are only a couple places where the UPCs are state specific and the machinery reads the UPC
I'm sorry.
that way. There aren't that many places where the technology is that developed, like California is a gigantic state, 60 million people in it. And so they have special UPC codes there that make it easy to determine that that's a California can. But
Representative Tory.
I was just wondering, in terms of these redemption rate goals, if there's any scenarios that you could foresee. This is new. That there could be a failure to hit the target, but not because of decent, engagement by consumers. Like what are some other scenarios that can impact the redemption rate negatively?
Well, I think with the first target, there is going to be a set of challenges around initial program implementation and education for all of the containers that currently or used to not be in the system that are going to now be in the system. Beyond that, really, the dials are how many collection systems are out there, how convenient is it for consumers to redeem their containers, and education and outreach. And to some degree, the manufacturers were okay with having 2 consecutive years because they know that if they have a problem in year 1, they can really do promotional activities to try and get consumers more aware of the opportunity to redeem their cans, and they said that. So
yeah, great, thank you. Let's try to get a couple more pages under our belt here.
Okay, so you're on page 17, line 12, 1535. This is rulemaking. It's a general rulemaking grant.
You have a question?
I do actually. Before we move on, talking about the deposit got me looking back at the proposed amendments we got from Marcy Gallagher yesterday. And one of the things that I thought was particularly helpful, you're going back to page 12, minimum requirements for the stewardship plan was to have a section that says that the plan should describe how redemption centers will be financially incentivized to upgrade or purchase technology, including a low to no interest loan option. So meant when thinking about those like small stores out in rural Oregon that have the reverse recycling equipment, figuring out how to incentivize the purchase of one of those reverse recycling things seems like it would be a nice perk to add to the plan. So I'm sorry to go way back.
Matt, did you have a thought on that?
I guess my reaction is that it's not the retail or the redemption center's obligation to ensure that these opportunities exist. It's the PRO's obligation. I would be disturbed if we had a plan that came in that forced the cost of the system onto the redemption center as a part of the plan obligations.
You think the PRO should cover the cost of a reverse recycling machine?
I think that there are a set of convenience obligations that are on the PRO to meet.
Mm.
And it's the PRO's obligation to ensure that at a minimum, those collection obligations have been met and that they're meeting their goals, right? So they may need to go above that to get there.
Everyone need to find